I've dug through hundreds of British and American sources, dozens of interviews, and I can say this with confidence. 99% of you know only about 1% of the real story behind Richard Thompson, how this showman, wrestler, billionaire, and actor somehow became Prime Minister, and who's really behind him. His story is a roller coaster of soaring highs, humiliating lows, embarrassing moments, and surprising victories. Richard John Thompson was born in a modest suburb of Manchester, the fourth of 5 children of Frederick Thompson, a successful property developer, and Mary Thompson, a Scottish immigrant. The surname Thompson, originally Thomsen from Denmark, means son of Thomas, but Richard loved to joke that it meant luckiest bloke alive. His grandfather brought the name to England during the late Victorian era. Grandpa was a businessman too, owned a pub and a few gambling dens during the coal boom. But by the time he passed away at 49, only a small property business remained. Frederick, Richard's dad, worked from age 13 as a butcher's delivery boy and carpenter's assistant before taking over the family business at 21, renaming it Thompson and Sons. During the Great Depression, Frederick nearly went bust, which was pretty normal back then. Everyone was looking for a spot of work and a bit of hope. He cleverly sold off some early self-service grocery stores in Manchester for a tidy profit, then bought near-bankrupt estate agencies for pennies. This gave him access to houses heading for repossession. He snapped them up cheap and sold them for a pretty penny. Simple as that. Thompson and Sons soon became one of Manchester's leading property companies. Richard and his siblings grew up in a sprawling 23-room house, complete with a family chauffeur who drove them to school every day. Frederick drilled into them the same ruthless work ethic he lived by. Work hard, don't be weak. Be killers. Richard took this to heart, often tormenting classmates and even his younger brother. Once he threw a rubber band at a teacher. Spoiled, arrogant kid? Absolutely. But Frederick wasn't having it, so he sent Richard to a tough military boarding school in Yorkshire. The competition was fierce, but Richard thrived. They even nicknamed him Ladies' Man because of his charm with the girls. The school taught him the discipline he'd need for business and politics. After a couple of years at a local college, Richard transferred to the prestigious Manchester Business School. Then he joined his father's company. The first few years were anything but glamorous. Richard and his best mate rolled up their sleeves and fixed losses on some housing projects. It was an early lesson. Despite all the privileges life handed him, success meant hard graft. By 28, Richard was president of Thompson and Sons. One of his first moves was rebranding. Thompson and Sons sounds like your granddad's business, he joked. We need something slick. He renamed it Thompson Group and moved into a penthouse flat in Manchester's upscale Deansgate district. He started hitting the city's social scene, glitzy parties, exclusive clubs, often with a stunning date, sometimes flying solo. But it wasn't just play. He was selling his biggest product, himself. At a legendary party at Fabric nightclub, he met his future first wife, Victoria Novak, originally from Prague but raised in London. Victoria was stunning. Think a figure-hugging emerald dress, sky-high black stilettos, a diamond pendant that sparkled under the club lights, and a mischievous smile that could melt steel. She and her friends were struggling to get in when Richard, tall and confident, waved them through, picked up the tab, and chauffeured them home in his limo, except Victoria, who stayed by his side. They married in 1977, the same year Richard landed on the front page of the Manchester Evening News. The headline wasn't flattering. A lawsuit accused Thompson Group of discrimination, demanding $80 million. They didn't pay, but it was a draw, and Richard managed to avoid an admission of guilt. A win, but a lesson. Never admit mistakes. Richard made a name refurbishing the Commodore Hotel, turning it into the poshest spot in the city. The 1980s saw him open casinos in Blackpool, buy the legendary Plaza Hotel, and renovate an estate in Surrey, turning it into a private members' club. Unlike his father, Richard didn't build homes for the masses. He built playgrounds for the wealthy, because, having grown up in that world, he knew it inside out. Victoria bore him 3 children, Richard Jr., Victoria Jr., and Eric. Richard briefly owned an airline and even a football team, until the league folded. In 1987, he published The Art of the Deal, a bestseller that skyrocketed his fame. By 1989, his net worth was $1 billion, and he was on the cover of Time magazine. Life was golden. But the 1990s brought a downturn. The property market crashed, casinos filed for bankruptcy, and Richard's marriage to Victoria collapsed amid a messy public scandal. She received a $20 million payout and a 45-room mansion in exchange for silence about their private life. Richard then married his mistress, model Marilyn Marsh, with whom he had a daughter, Tiffany. Business was rocky. In 1995, he reported a $700 million loss and had to sell off assets. He started licensing his name for everything from coffee shops to steaks, anything to stay afloat. Despite debts of $800 million, Richard turned the tide, reclaiming a $600 million fortune. If things ever went belly up again, he joked, he'd just go back to college, maybe get into coding or cybersecurity. I'd say the same, but I'm more of a turn it off and on again kind of guy. Then in 1999, tragedy struck. Frederick died suddenly at 63. Richard's new partner, Melanie, would become his wife. Victoria had been a powerful business ally, but Marilyn was a passing chapter. Richard founded a modeling agency and ran beauty pageants like Miss Universe and Miss England for nearly 2 decades. By 2004, he launched his own fragrance, Richard Thompson, The Scent, and began hosting his hit reality TV show, The Apprentice, where contestants vied for a top job in his empire. His catchphrase, "You're fired," became legendary. The show ran for 14 seasons, making him a household name across Britain. He even has a star on the Manchester Walk of Fame and appeared in several films, not as a respected actor but more as a cameo, often for laughs or marketing. Richard loved wrestling too, though the staged fights were more fun than real combat. He once shaved the head of a famous wrestling promoter on live TV. He was still king of property, but craved the crown jewel: politics. He toyed with running for prime minister in the late 80s, 90s, and early 2000s, but only announced his bid in June 2015. His slogan, "Make Britain Great Again," struck a chord with many. He was aggressive, often insulting rivals, and even the sitting prime minister, accusing him of being born in another country. He called his main opponent, Elizabeth Clark, dim as a damp wick. He railed against political correctness, illegal immigration, and promised to cut taxes, renegotiate trade deals, create 1 million jobs, and build a border wall funded by Ireland. He vowed to improve relations with Russia, which, well, didn't exactly pan out. Richard was the first British Prime Minister with no prior political or military experience. His term was scandal-ridden. Twice the Parliament tried to impeach him. The first time over pressuring the Irish president to dig up dirt on a political rival. The second after losing the election, when he claimed the vote was rigged, leading to a violent storming of the Parliament building. 4 people died. He was acquitted both times. Accusations flew about collusion with Russian intelligence to influence elections, spreading disinformation. In 2017, he fired the head of MI5, who was investigating the matter. Russia denied interference, and in 2023, investigations cleared Richard of all charges. He waged war against liberal media, coining fake news to dismiss criticism. He sued major networks for defamation, seeking hundreds of millions in damages, claiming they called him everything from a puppet to a fascist. In 2018, it was revealed his lawyer paid a former adult film star $100,000 to keep quiet about an affair during his marriage to Melanie. A leaked 2005 video showed Richard boasting about grabbing women by their, well, let's just say it was locker room talk, but it caused a storm. At least 26 women have accused him of sexual misconduct from 1970 to 2016. Richard was prolific on Twitter, firing off multiple tweets daily, often provocative and confrontational, even to world leaders. He attempted to negotiate with North Korea's Kim Jong-nam via Twitter before meeting him in person, the first British leader to do so. Twitter banned him in 2021, but after Elon Musk bought the platform, Richard's account was reinstated. His term wasn't just scandals. In 2019, he offered to buy Greenland from Denmark. The Danish queen was stunned and promptly refused. Richard then refused to attend a state visit. During a photo shoot with a bald eagle, the bird attacked him, causing a media frenzy. He once said Britain didn't need immigrants from shithole countries like parts of Africa. Better to have more from Norway, which had the country laughing for weeks. His famously awkward handshake with French President Emmanuel Macron became a viral meme. At a fish-feeding ceremony in Japan, he dumped an entire container of fish food into the pond, prompting staff to scramble to clean up. He criticized Germany's dependence on Russian gas and their car exports, sparking a war of words with Angela Merkel. In 2018, he left his umbrella on the plane entrance, and when it rained, he didn't know how to close it properly. That same year, he announced the creation of Britain's Space Force as a separate military branch. Just a week ago, there was an assassination attempt. A bullet skimmed his skull, grazing only his ear. The shooter was killed on the spot, and Richard was left with a chilling X-ray that will go down in history. It all seemed too perfect, some say staged, but only a man like Richard could pull off such a dramatic near miss. Now, 78, Richard still looks spry. Melanie is 54. Their son Ron is 18. His children are all grown. His net worth is estimated between $4 and $5 billion. He always wears a red tie, red symbolizing power and confidence. But here's the most exclusive tidbit. Despite all the chaos, the lawsuits, the affairs, the media circus, Richard Thompson's story is far from over. Just when you think you've got him figured out, a new mystery pops up. What's really behind his meteoric rise and survival? Who's pulling the strings in the shadows? Because the biggest question remains. Did he really luck out, or is there something darker at play? The next chapter? Well, that's a story for another time, and it's one you won't want to miss. I remember the evening I first truly saw Richard Thompson beyond the headlines and tabloid caricatures. It was a chilly autumn night in Manchester, and I was attending a charity gala at the Grand Midland Hotel. The room was filled with the city's elite, glittering gowns, polished tuxedos, and the hum of sly negotiations masked as polite conversation. Amidst all this, Richard stood out, not just because of his height or that trademark red tie, but because of the energy he radiated. He wasn't just another rich businessman. He was a force of nature, a man who seemed to command the room with a mere glance. Victoria, his wife at the time, was the epitome of elegance. She wore a deep emerald silk dress that hugged her curves perfectly, paired with black patent leather stilettos that clicked assertively as she moved. A delicate diamond pendant rested against her collarbone, catching the light with every turn. There was an understated sensuality about her, a poise that was both commanding and inviting. She laughed softly, but there was a sharpness in her eyes that hinted she was no stranger to the power games Richard so loved. Richard himself was dressed in a tailored navy suit, crisp white shirt, and that notorious red tie, always perfectly knotted, as if it were a part of his very identity. His hair, meticulously coiffed, seemed to defy gravity, and his broad smile revealed a hint of mischief. He had that cocky charm of a man who knew he was the smartest guy in the room, but was willing to play the fool if it served his purpose. That night, Richard was in his element, working the room with ease. He charmed investors, rubbed elbows with politicians, and made veiled promises that could only be described as tantalizingly vague. At one point, he cornered a group of young entrepreneurs, regaling them with tales of his early days, how he'd turned a near-bankrupt family business into an empire. "You see," he said, leaning in conspiratorially, "it's all about knowing when to hold 'em and when to fold 'em, and sometimes bluffing your way through the tough spots." He had a knack for storytelling, always sprinkling in a joke or two. "You know, I once told my dad I was going to be prime minister. He laughed so hard he nearly spilled his brandy. Well, here I am, making him eat his words." But beneath the bravado, I caught glimpses of something else, a hint of vulnerability, a flicker of doubt that he quickly masked with a grin. It was clear that this man was driven not just by ambition, but by a deep-seated need to prove himself, to outshine his father's legacy. As the evening wore on, I noticed Victoria slipping away from the crowd, retreating to a quiet corner where she pulled out a sleek smartphone. She sent a quick message, her fingers trembling ever so slightly, a rare crack in her composed exterior. Moments later, Richard excused himself from a boisterous conversation and joined her. Their exchange was brief but intense, a silent negotiation of power and affection that only years of marriage could forge. Later that night, as the gala wound down, Richard invited me for a drink at a nearby speakeasy, a dimly lit, smoky joint tucked away in an alley off Deansgate. The place was a stark contrast to the glittering ballroom, with worn leather seats, jazz music drifting through the haze, and an air of secrecy that seemed to suit him perfectly. Over a glass of single malt, Richard confided, "You know, the public sees the glitz, the scandals, the headlines. But the real game, it's played in moments like this, away from the cameras. It's about reading people, knowing their weaknesses, and exploiting them, of course." He paused, swirling the amber liquid thoughtfully. "But sometimes, even I wonder if I'm losing myself in the process. There's a fine line between confidence and arrogance, and I'm not sure I always know where I stand." I raised my glass to that, a toast not just to the man, but to the enigma that was Richard Thompson. Just as I was about to ask about the latest rumors swirling around his political ambitions, his phone buzzed violently. He glanced at it, his face tightening. "Well, seems the shadows are catching up to me again," he muttered. "Looks like the next move's going to be the most dangerous yet." And with that, the night plunged into silence, the mystery deepening. The morning after that night at the speakeasy, the Manchester skyline was draped in a thick fog, the kind that makes even the most familiar streets feel mysterious and new. I found myself walking toward Richard's office in the heart of the city's business district, a sleek glass tower that gleamed coldly against the gray sky. It was the kind of place where deals were struck with a handshake and a smirk, and where the scent of power hung heavier than the morning coffee. Inside, the office was a striking mix of minimalist modernity and old-world charm. Polished oak panels lined the walls, contrasting with the steel and glass furniture. A massive mahogany desk dominated the room, cluttered with papers, contracts, and a few well-worn leather-bound books. Richard sat behind it, dressed impeccably in a tailored charcoal suit, his red tie a bold slash of color against the crisp white shirt. His eyes were sharp, scanning a document with the intensity of a hawk. But it wasn't the paperwork that caught my attention. It was the woman standing by the window. Tall, with an effortless grace, she wore a form-fitting burgundy dress that stopped just above the knee, paired with black suede heels that added a few inches to her already statuesque frame. Her dark hair cascaded in soft waves over one shoulder, and a delicate silver bracelet glinted on her wrist. There was a subtle elegance to her, a quiet power that seemed to command the room without a word. She glanced over her shoulder, meeting my gaze with a smile that was both inviting and enigmatic. "Emma," Richard introduced her smoothly. "My chief strategist and the brains behind the latest campaign." Emma's presence was electrifying, yet there was a warmth in her smile that softened the sharp edges of the office. She extended her hand, cool and confident. "Pleased to meet you. Richard tends to exaggerate, but I assure you, I'm more about the numbers than the drama." Richard chuckled. "Don't let her fool you. She's ruthless when it counts." As we settled into a conversation, Richard outlined his latest plans, a bold, unconventional approach to winning the upcoming election. "The public's tired of polished politicians and empty promises," he said, leaning forward, fingers steepled. "They want authenticity, even if it's raw and a bit rough around the edges." Emma nodded. "We're crafting a message that cuts through the noise, something that resonates with everyday people, but also challenges the establishment. It's a tightrope walk, but Richard's got the charisma to pull it off." I couldn't help but notice the subtle dance between them, the way Emma's eyes flicked to Richard when he spoke, and how he seemed to seek her approval before making a point. They were partners, not just in strategy, but in a delicate game of trust and ambition. Suddenly, Richard's phone buzzed again. This time, he didn't hesitate. His face darkened as he read the message. "Looks like the press has caught wind of the leaked memo," he muttered. "They're spinning it as a scandal, but it's just politics as usual." Emma's expression tightened. "We need to control the narrative before it spirals." "Spin it your way, Richard." He stood up, towering over the room. Time to remind them who's really in charge. Before leaving, Richard turned back to me with a grin that was equal parts charm and warning. "Stick around. The next few weeks will be a masterclass in chaos, and trust me, you won't want to miss a moment." As he strode out, Emma's eyes lingered on the door, a flicker of something unreadable passing through them. The game was on, and the stakes were higher than ever. The city was buzzing with electric tension when I arrived at the Grand Hall for Richard's latest campaign launch. The venue was an opulent blend of old Manchester charm and modern luxury. Marble pillars, crystal chandeliers casting shimmering light over polished oak floors. The air smelled faintly of expensive perfume and anticipation. Victoria stood at the entrance, greeting guests with a practiced smile that barely concealed a simmering edge. Tonight, she wore a midnight blue velvet gown that hugged her slender frame, the plunging neckline tastefully balanced by long sleeves. Her auburn hair was swept into a loose chignon, strands softly framing her porcelain face. A pair of sapphire earrings caught the light every time she tilted her head, and her lips were painted a bold crimson. There was an undeniable allure about her, poised, confident, yet with just a hint of vulnerability that made her all the more magnetic. Richard appeared moments later, the room seeming to brighten with his presence. He wore a sleek black tuxedo, the red tie replaced by a classic black one, showing a rare nod to formality. His signature hair was flawless, and his grin was as sharp as ever, as if daring the world to take him on. As he took the stage, the crowd hushed. His voice boomed confidently through the speakers, weaving a narrative of renewal, strength, and hope. "We're not just here to make history," he declared. "We're here to rewrite it. Together we'll build a Britain that works for everyone. No more empty promises, just real action." The applause was thunderous, the kind that rattled the chandeliers. But behind the scenes, tensions simmered. I caught a glimpse of Emma watching from the shadows, arms crossed, her eyes narrowing as Richard soaked in the adulation. Their earlier partnership felt strained now, as if the campaign's spotlight was exposing fissures beneath the surface. Later, at the after-party held in a gilded private room, the atmosphere shifted. The room was dim, lit by flickering candles on heavy oak tables. Richard leaned close to Victoria, his voice low and urgent. "We need to tighten up the messaging. That leak was just the beginning. The press will come at us harder." Victoria's eyes sparkled with a mix of excitement and calculation. "Let them come. We've weathered worse. Besides, I've got a few surprises of my own." She moved with a feline grace, her fingers trailing along the rim of her glass, the ruby liquid catching the candlelight like liquid fire. There was a subtle seduction in the way she held herself, power wrapped in elegance. I found myself drawn into a conversation with one of Richard's closest aides, a sharp-witted man named James. He leaned in conspiratorially, lowering his voice. "You think this is just politics? It's a battlefield. Every smile, every handshake, every word, weaponized. And Richard, he's a master of warfare." As the night deepened, whispers of backroom deals and whispered threats floated through the air. The campaign was no longer just about winning votes. It was about survival. Just as the clock struck midnight, a sudden commotion erupted near the entrance. A group of protesters had gathered, their chants spilling into the hall like an unwelcome storm. Richard's security moved quickly, but the moment shattered the fragile glamour. Amid the chaos, Victoria's composed mask slipped for a heartbeat, her eyes flashing with something fierce and unreadable. She caught Richard's gaze, and for a fleeting second, it was as if they shared a secret battle only they understood. That night, as the guests filtered out into the cold Manchester air, I realized the campaign was more than a public spectacle. It was a high-stakes game of power, passion, and peril, and the next move could change everything. But beneath the glitter and the grand speeches, a darker mystery lingered, one that threatened to unravel not just Richard's ambitions, but the very fabric of the empire he'd built. The following morning, Manchester woke to a city cloaked in a crisp, biting chill, the kind that seeps into your bones and makes you crave strong tea and thicker coats. The papers were already buzzing, headlines screaming about the protest at Richard's launch, speculation about the hidden forces working against him. But what caught my eye was a small, almost overlooked article buried deep in the business section. A cryptic mention of a mysterious figure linked to Richard's past, someone named the Broker. Curiosity gnawed at me, so I decided to dig a little deeper. My search led me to a quiet corner of the city, a dimly lit, smoke-filled jazz club tucked away in an alley off Canal Street, the kind of place where secrets were traded like currency, and the past seemed to hang heavy in the thick air. Inside, the patrons were a mix of shadowy businessmen, artists, and the occasional politician nursing a scotch. I was scanning the room when a man approached, a wiry fellow with sharp eyes and a crooked smile. He introduced himself as Peter Langley, an old associate of Thompson's family. His leather jacket was worn, but he carried himself with the confidence of someone who knew the city's underbelly like the back of his hand. "Looking for the Broker, are you?" he asked, voice low and gravelly. "Not a man you find in the light." Over a cigarette and a pint, Peter unfolded a tale that sounded part legend, part nightmare. The Broker, he said, was the shadow behind Richard's rise, a man who brokered deals that no one else dared touch, who had fingers in every risky pie from property scams to political backroom deals. "Richard's no self-made man," Peter whispered, eyes darting nervously. "He's got help, dark help. The Broker's the puppeteer, pulling strings from the shadows." I pressed Peter for details, but he only smiled slyly. "Names cost money, and I'm not in the habit of giving away currency for free." As I left the club, the fog had thickened, wrapping the streets in a ghostly embrace. I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just brushed up against something dangerous. Back at Thompson's headquarters, the atmosphere was tense. Emma was pacing, her burgundy dress now replaced by a sharp black pantsuit, heels clicking decisively against the marble floor. She looked every inch the strategist, but her eyes betrayed exhaustion. Richard entered, his usual confident grin replaced by a hardened expression. "We've got leaks," More than before. Someone's undermining us from within. Emma shot him a sharp glance. You think it's the broker? He hesitated, then nodded. If he exists, he's playing a long game, and we're just pieces on his board. Just then, Victoria appeared, her sapphire earrings catching the fluorescent light, her voice calm but steely. We need to find out who's really pulling the strings before they pull us under. The three of them exchanged looks, a silent alliance forged in the crucible of power and paranoia. That night, as I walked the rain-slicked streets, the city's shadows seemed to whisper secrets I wasn't sure I wanted to hear. Who was the broker? And how deep did his influence run? One thing was certain. Richard Thompson's empire was built on more than ambition and charm, and the real game was only just beginning. The next day dawned gray and damp, the kind of weather that made the city feel both alive and ominous, like a stage set for secrets to unravel. I found myself back at the Thompson Group's towering headquarters, invited to a private meeting that promised answers, or at least more questions. The conference room was an imposing space, all glass walls and chrome accents, overlooking the bustling streets below. Richard sat at the head of the long, polished table, flanked by Emma and Victoria. Emma's sharp black suit was immaculate, her dark hair pulled into a tight bun that emphasized her steely gaze. Victoria, ever the embodiment of poised elegance, wore a deep plum-sheath dress, her ruby necklace catching the morning light just so. Her expression was unreadable, but there was a fire burning behind her calm exterior. "Thank you all for coming," Richard began, his voice steady but laced with tension. "We've uncovered some troubling information about the broker. Whoever he is, he's more than just a shadowy fixer. He's embedded deeply within our own ranks." Emma clicked a remote, and the projector flickered to life, displaying a web of names and connections, a spider's nest of intrigue. Our intel suggests the broker controls several shell companies linked to our recent property acquisitions. More concerningly, there are leaked financial records showing unauthorized funds moving through accounts tied to people close to us. Victoria leaned forward, her fingers lightly brushing the table. This isn't just a business threat, it's personal. If the broker has eyes and ears inside, he could manipulate political moves, damage reputations, even sabotage the campaign. Richard's jaw tightened. Which means we need to strike first. Suddenly, the room's large glass doors slid open, and James, the sharp-witted aide I'd met before, strode in, breathless. "You need to see this," he said, handing over a tablet. On the screen was a video clip, grainy but unmistakable footage of a late-night meeting between a Thompson Group executive and an unknown figure. Emma's eyes narrowed. "That's our guy. He's been leaking information." Richard's voice dropped to a growl. "Find him. Now." The hunt was on. Later that evening, I shadowed Richard as he moved through the city's underbelly, a world far removed from the polished boardrooms and gala events. Neon signs flickered above smoky pubs, and the air was thick with the scent of fried food and forgotten dreams. We arrived at a rundown warehouse on the edge of the docks, a place whispered about in hushed tones. Inside, shadows moved furtively among crates and rusting machinery. Richard's voice was low but commanding. "We're here to end this." As we stepped deeper into the darkness, a figure emerged, a tall man in a worn leather jacket, eyes cold and calculating. The broker, no doubt. The tension was palpable, the air crackling with unspoken threats. Before anyone could speak, a loud crash echoed from the far end of the warehouse. Suddenly, spotlights snapped on, revealing a group of masked figures surrounding us. Richard's smile was razor-sharp. "Ah, the welcoming committee. I was hoping for a less dramatic introduction." The standoff was thick with danger, and as the masked men advanced, I realized this confrontation was only the beginning of a deeper, darker game, one where the stakes were no longer just money or power, but survival. And in the shadows, the broker watched, ready to make his next move. The warehouse's stale air was thick with tension, mingling with the faint scent of oil and rust. The masked figures circled us like wolves, their footsteps echoing ominously against the cold concrete floor. Richard stood tall, unflinching, his tailored black coat flaring slightly as he shifted his weight. Emma's eyes scanned the room, calculating every possible exit, while Victoria's graceful poise remained intact, though her fingers tightened subtly around the stem of her wine glass, an accessory she'd somehow managed to keep, despite the chaos. The leader of the masked group stepped forward, a bulky figure with a deep voice muffled by a dark scarf. "Mr. Thompson, we've been expecting you. Your little empire is built on fragile foundations, and it's time someone knocked it down." Richard's lips curled into a sardonic smile. "Fragile? I prefer strategically flexible. Care to test it?" Emma's voice cut through the tension like a scalpel. "What do you want?" The masked man hesitated, then pulled back his scarf, just enough for a glimpse of a scar running down his jaw. A souvenir from a past no one wanted to revisit. Information, control, and a warning. Stop digging into the broker, or the fallout won't just be professional. Victoria stepped forward, her dress catching the dim light. A deep burgundy silk that clung to her curves, the modest slit revealing just enough leg to unsettle even the most hardened thug. "Threats won't work on us," she said coolly. "If anything, they make us stronger." Suddenly, a sharp metallic clang echoed, a loose chain swinging from the rafters. The leader's eyes flicked upward, and in that split second, Richard lunged forward with surprising agility, knocking the man off balance. Chaos erupted. Emma moved swiftly, grabbing a heavy metal pipe and swinging it with precision, scattering a few of the masked men. Victoria, not one to be sidelined, wielded a decorative, but surprisingly sturdy, cane like a fencing foil, fending off attackers with unexpected skill. I found myself caught between adrenaline and disbelief. Here I was, in the middle of a real-life thriller, watching Richard Thompson and his inner circle transform from polished elites into fierce combatants. The contrast was striking, his tailored coat now smeared with grime, hair slightly tousled, eyes blazing with defiance. As the scuffle intensified, a sudden siren wailed outside, echoing through the warehouse. The masked men hesitated, exchanging glances, before melting back into the shadows like ghosts. Richard wiped a smear of dirt from his cheek, panting but unbowed. "That was a warning," he said grimly. "But I'm just getting started." Back on the rain-slicked streets, the city lights blurred into streaks as we sped away in a sleek black car. Emma sat beside Richard, already on her phone coordinating damage control. Victoria leaned back, her crimson lips pressed into a tight line that betrayed nothing but resolve. The attack had changed everything. The broker was no longer just a shadowy rumor. He was a very real and very dangerous adversary, and if Richard wanted to survive, he'd have to play smarter, strike harder, and trust fewer people than ever before. But in the dim glow of the car's interior, as the city rushed past, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the opening act. The real danger, the true game, was still lurking in the shadows, waiting to reveal itself at the worst possible moment. The following morning, the city was cloaked in a thick fog that blurred the sharp lines of Manchester's skyline into a soft, uncertain haze. Inside a sleek penthouse overlooking the river, Richard sat alone, the weight of last night's attack settling heavily on his broad shoulders. The room was minimalist but tastefully decorated, dark leather chairs, glass tables, and a massive painting of a stormy sea dominating one wall. He wore a crisp white shirt, sleeves rolled up, and that signature red tie loosened just enough to suggest fatigue. Victoria entered quietly, her footsteps soft against the polished floor. She wore a silk blouse in deep wine, paired with a pencil skirt that hugged her hips with subtle elegance. Her hair was pulled back into a loose bun, a few strands framing her sharp cheekbones. There was a mixture of concern and steely determination in her gaze. "You're pushing too hard, Richard," she said gently, settling beside him. "This isn't just a game anymore." Richard looked up, a faint smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Since when was it ever just a game?" She reached out, brushing a stray lock of hair from his forehead. "I know, but we need to be smarter. More careful." He sighed deeply, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. "Emma's tracking every move the broker makes. We've got eyes everywhere, but it feels like we're still 2 steps behind." Victoria's gaze hardened. "Then it's time to stop reacting. We need to take the fight to him." Just then, Richard's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen. A message from Emma. "Found something. Meet me at the safe house." Within the hour, we were in a discreet townhouse on the outskirts of the city. Emma greeted us at the door, her usual sharp demeanor tinged with urgency. She was dressed down, dark jeans and a leather jacket, but her eyes sparkled with a fierce intelligence. "It's bigger than we thought," she began, leading us into a cramped room filled with monitors and scattered papers. "The broker isn't just a fixer. He's connected to some of the highest levels of government and finance. We're talking about a network that spans continents." Richard paced, absorbing the information. "So this isn't just a local turf war. It's global." Emma nodded. "And they're watching us. Every move we make." Victoria stepped forward, her voice low but steady. "Then we need leverage, something that can bring them to their knees." Emma pulled up a file on the screen, a dossier filled with photographs, emails, and bank records. "We've uncovered evidence of illicit deals, money laundering, and political bribery tied directly to the broker's network. If we play this right, we can expose them all." Richard's eyes gleamed with renewed fire. "Then it's time to go on the offensive." As plans were laid out, the room buzzed with a tense excitement, but beneath it all was an unspoken truth. The deeper they dug, the more dangerous the game became. And somewhere, hidden in the shadows, the broker was watching, waiting for the perfect moment to strike back. Little did we know the next move would change everything. The night air was sharp as we slipped into the underground parking garage beneath the safe house, the distant hum of the city muffled by thick concrete walls. Richard, Emma, and Victoria moved with purpose, the weight of the dossier heavy in their minds. The plan was risky, but the only way to expose the broker's network and wrest control from the shadows. Richard was dressed for the occasion, black tailored trousers, a fitted leather jacket over a crisp shirt, and his trademark red tie loosened just enough to hint at rebellion. Victoria's ensemble was a master class in understated seduction, a midnight blue wrap dress that clung to her curves, paired with elegant black heels that clicked softly on the concrete. Her ruby necklace caught the dim light, a silent reminder of the power she wielded. Emma, ever the strategist, opted for practicality, dark jeans, boots, and a sleek black coat, her sharp eyes scanning every corner. We piled into a nondescript black van, the windows tinted to near opacity. The driver, an ex-military man with nerves of steel, navigated the labyrinthine city streets with practiced ease. The mission was clear. Infiltrate a gala hosted by one of the broker's closest allies, extract critical data, and walk away unnoticed. The venue was a sprawling manor on the outskirts of Cheshire, bathed in golden light and bustling with the crème de la crème of Britain's elite. Inside, chandeliers sparkled over marble floors, and the murmur of hushed conversations mingled with the clink of crystal glasses. It was a world away from the gritty streets we'd traversed hours before. Richard moved through the crowd like a shark among minnows, his confidence magnetic. Victoria floated beside him, her presence a blend of elegance and danger that turned heads. Whispers of admiration followed in their wake. Emma, blending seamlessly into the background, kept a steady eye on the security detail. As the evening progressed, Richard and Victoria engaged key figures in casual yet pointed conversation, planting seeds of doubt and gathering intel. Meanwhile, Emma slipped away to the secured office upstairs, her nimble fingers working quickly to bypass sophisticated security systems. Tension mounted as footsteps echoed nearby, forcing Emma to freeze mid-hack. The seconds stretched like hours, every breath loud in her ears. Then the footsteps passed, and she resumed her work, finally extracting the encrypted files. Triumph flashed briefly in her eyes. Suddenly the gala's atmosphere shifted, a subtle but unmistakable change. Richard's smile faltered as he caught sight of a familiar figure entering the room. The broker himself, tall and imposing, his eyes like cold steel. The air grew thick with menace. Victoria's gaze locked with Richard's, a silent warning passing between them. The game had just entered its deadliest phase, and as the clock ticked down, the question hung in the air. Who would make the next move, and who would fall first? The grand hall seemed to hold its breath as the broker swept into the room, every eye instinctively drawn to his commanding presence. He was a tall man, impeccably dressed in a midnight black suit that contrasted sharply with his pale, almost ghostly complexion. His dark hair was slicked back, and a faint scar traced a thin line from his temple down to his jaw, a sinister reminder of battles fought in shadows. His cold, calculating eyes scanned the crowd, finally resting on Richard. Richard met the gaze without flinching, his red tie now loosened, symbolizing a man stripped of pretense but not of will. Victoria stood beside him, her burgundy dress shimmering softly under the chandelier light, the subtle slit along her leg hinting at a fearless elegance. Emma remained poised, fingers clenched lightly on the small device containing the stolen files. The broker's voice cut through the murmurs like a knife. Mr. Thompson, I must commend you on your persistence. But persistence can be dangerous, sometimes fatal. Richard smiled, sharp and unyielding. Danger's part of the game, isn't it? And I'm no stranger to risk. A tense silence fell as the two men measured each other, a battle of wills playing out without a single word exchanged. Then, without warning, the broker signaled to his men. The room erupted into chaos. Masked enforcers surged forward, but Richard, Victoria, and Emma were ready. With practiced precision, they moved as one, dodging, weaving, and countering the assault. Crystal glasses shattered, expensive gowns tore, and the glittering veneer of high society was replaced by raw, desperate survival. In the midst of the turmoil, Emma secured the data drive in her clutch. "We've got what we came for," she shouted over the din. Richard nodded. Time to vanish. They slipped through a concealed side exit, the cold night air a stark contrast to the chaos they left behind. The city's fog swallowed them as they disappeared into the labyrinth of alleys and side streets. Back in the safety of the safe house, Richard connected the drive to a secure terminal. The files began to reveal a tangled web of corruption, bribery, and illicit deals reaching far beyond anything they'd imagined. But as the first names and faces appeared on the screen, a chilling message popped up. "You've made powerful enemies. This is only the beginning." Richard leaned back, eyes dark with determination. "Then we fight. Harder." Victoria placed a steady hand on his arm. Together. Emma stared at the screen, a faint smile curling her lips. "And this time, we'll be the ones writing the story." Outside, the city thrummed with life, oblivious to the storm brewing beneath its surface. And somewhere in the shadows, the broker watched and waited, ready to strike again. Because in this game of power, there are no true winners, only survivors. The question is, who will be left standing when the final move is made?